Welcome. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports, Patriotism in Action. So glad you can join us for this particular broadcast. And I'm going to narrow the focus. And there's a subject that I have addressed in many ways, especially with this program over the last few years, being syndicated with or involved through many alternative networks, some patriot networks, some just considered, quite frankly, fringe radio. But nevertheless, it gave me an opportunity to be heard. But, you know, a sensible person realizes, and an educated person realizes, that there, when it comes to something called free speech, it's not an open license to defame. And there are laws, whether it's the laws of the Creator or laws of man, meaning government, that are instituted when it pertains to slander, libel, or just flat-out defamation. And so when you blame an entire group of people, and when you say that all the nation and all the world's ails can be placed, or let's just say the onus of blame or responsibility for all the problems in the world go back to a specific group of people and not specific individuals within that group of people, then yes, you could call it hate speech. Now, I don't want to see the government of this country or any country, although there are countries that prosecute hate speech. And again, I believe in free and open debate. But to be reckless and irresponsible, you know, my sense is that when you see something and you know something, it's almost like the you know what is good art, or you know when something just isn't right, and your senses, your antenna, your radar. I think most people realize the difference between unpopular speech, controversial speech, and debating and discussing intellectually issues. And I've always said, when it comes to the conspiracy theories or conspiracy facts of history, that name the names, regardless of what the ethnic background might be, and then let the chips fall. But there are a lot of individuals from so many different families and groups and tribes and nation states, and it's kind of a potpourri or cornucopia of so many different flavors in the mix. Now, there are certain industries and there are certain, I would say, power centers that may reflect more of one group than another. But what I want to do is I want to congratulate the previous network that was my flagship network that I syndicated with or through, and that's Orion Talk Radio. I know Jim Berryman. I never asked Jim whether Berryman is Jewish or not. It may be. I don't know. I don't care. But I know that Jimmy, like myself, after I left Oracle, that I said, I don't want to be with a network. I don't want to be with other hosts that all they want to do is hate and blame and defame. And so he assured me that the focus of the network, because he had dropped certain programs that were connected to either RBN or Oracle. And so I started to hear a few rumblings. And a person that I call Maggot, and you can figure out this old granny's real name from that. Boy, what a foul-mouthed person and abject filth she is. I've had to deal with her off the air, too. But let me just say this, that she's going to blame everybody else but herself for her failings. And when you're demanding and controlling, hey, if you're put to the B side of a channel, you just got to live with it. Maybe you're just not an A gamer. You know, maybe you're not, you know, the top shelf or top drawer. You can't demand where you're going to be placed on a network. I mean, you can request, but if you don't own or have an ownership stake or a supervisory role, you can only request. So then you come to another network, and although you were affiliated with this network, at least part-time, and wanting to carve out certain times and try to make decisions that TalkStream Live and Orion and everybody should just cater to. Well, this person had to realize they weren't in charge, and many of these decisions weren't their decisions to make. But I voiced my concern months ago that I'm hearing Nazis on here. I'm hearing the worst, wretched haters. And you can tell when someone, and again, I've talked about my issues with the state of Israel to some degree and Zionism, but I've also taken on other isms. But I have a lot of Jewish friends and colleagues, and some of them I agree with and I appreciate and I applaud or respect, and others, I have issues just like I would someone that might be Irish and Scottish or might be Catholic, might be this or that. I've always said the way I do my program and the way I approach life is, as Jesus said, you'll know them by their fruits. You bore bad fruit, then that's the key. I'm not as concerned about your heritage, your ethnicity, your race, your creed. I'm more concerned about, it's like if you hire somebody, you want to find out what is their work product, what is their productivity. And sometimes, I guess, in life you want to know what one's intentions or motivations are, but, let's see what you produce. What's the quality of that production? And that's the way I look at people, whether it's in the broadcast field, the political arena. Okay, let's look at your body of work. But when people say, well, free speech means I can say anything I want. Well, okay, if you defame somebody and they decide to sue you, or if the government, whether it be the government or whether it could be civil, it could be criminal, but if you traffic in defamation, or you decide to slander or libel, there are legal, serious consequences. And so my sense is that when you hide behind the shield of free speech, but it's really, it's a guise or a disguise to shield or protect yourself from the fact that you hate. And usually it's not just the Jews, but there's usually an underlying hatred of people that are different from them. Not just the belief system or the religion, but I noticed that many of these same people, when they mimic people of other ethnicities or races, you can tell that they're bigots. You can tell that there is a proclivity and a propensity for a tremendous amount of hatred and vile that spews from their lips. And I think that we should repudiate all forms of blanketed hatred, overgeneralizations, and just lumping all folks in, as one. So let me just read to you, and I really love the banner they originally put on their website. And Jim and some of the hosts at Orion are taking a lot of heat because, and some people have been, they've been released from so-called talk show duties because they didn't want to abide by just simple, basic, commonsensical. And again, you might say, where's your dog in the hunt here? Well, there isn't, because I'm an independent player. I'm not affiliated with any station or network at this point. But you know what? I've always been a person that could applaud the efforts of others, regardless of whether I'm connected or affiliated. So this banner that they put on their website, it has the line going across, and in the circle it says hate speech. Freedom of speech does not condone Jewish hate speech. Orion Talk Radio says no to hate speech. And this was posted within the last 2 weeks. I'm not sure. I don't have the exact date in front of me here. But it says here, Orion Talk Radio extends its remorse over unexpected and regretful incidents of anti-Semitic hate speech that went out over our station and airwaves and wrongly conveyed that all people of Jewish ancestry and religion are evil or bad. To be fair, commenting about Zionism and the Israeli government are one thing, but to claim that all Jews are bad is an extreme far-right viewpoint that has no place in the media, and most especially not on Orion Talk Radio. We fully support the right to free speech, but we also understand that free speech does not sanction or support the right to hate speech, that which denigrates an entire ethnic culture or singles out those of a specific color or religious affiliation. A precious hallowed right, such as the First Amendment, was never intended to be used for hate speech, nor to target specific groups by ethnicity or color. Let us be public and perfectly clear on this divisive issue. Orion Talk Radio does not condone ideology such as this, and has already taken internal steps to remedy the issue, implementing policies within to ensure that such an incident does not happen again, by setting procedures in place that allows for the immediate dismissal upon violation of said policy. As a sign of our commitment and sensitivity to the issue, a zero-tolerance policy has been enacted. At Orion Talk Radio, we refuse to follow the dark path of divisive, hateful speech. Our sincere hope is for Orion to be the number one choice for listeners who are seeking alternatives to the mainstream media, disinformation, and propaganda machine. Our mission is to unite people, not to divide them. At Orion Talk Radio, we don't take our responsibility lightly. And we know that we are all in this fight for freedom and liberty together. So with that said, we thank you for allowing us into your daily Okay, so, wait a minute, there is a final sentence here I may want to share with you. It's basically thanking the listeners for their daily listening to the network and the station. It says, for helping us spread the word and the truth about the real issues that affect us in the allied fight that we face together against the real forces of the New World Order. So again, I want to applaud their efforts, and I just think it's fantastic that finally one single solitary network in the alternative has made this official policy. Now, I know there's some other networks that behind the scenes, they kind of, I guess you would say put a little pressure or a little influence to say, hey, this is not the type of program we thought we were signing on for or signing you up to. And remember, the public airwaves, even through the internet, again, it is unregulated. But if you decide, it's like saying, oh, well, I should be able to be a squatter. I should be able to just come to anybody's home. Or if I'm a guest in someone's home, I should be able to trash it. Yeah. No, there's just certain, I guess, acts of, I was going to say, there's certain rules of courtesy and decency and, doing the right thing. And so why not apply the same principles in this particular case? That if, I know that everybody has encountered people of color, people that are different from themselves. And haven't you been proved wrong many times where you say, you know what, some of these negative connotations or stereotypes that I have believed or perceived, become more or less shattered, because you realize that, we're all at choice. We're all, can decide to do the right things or the wrong things, the moral or the immoral, the just or the unjust. And so that's how I evaluate individuals. And so I was really overjoyed to see this. And again, I don't really have an axe to grind here. I don't really have a dog in this hunt. And I'm not taking anyone's side because, as you know, I have left or become unaffiliated with certain, and I gave the example of Oracle. And I can tell you that I'm not vying to get back onto any particular network. I am not returning to the alternative internet networks, okay, or fringe radio, or because there's not enough listeners, and there's not a consistent way of shoring up sponsorship or having some kind of financial, sound financial basis. So, you got to have a strong foundation, and you have to be solvent and solid in these kinds of things. And so I've already made up my mind that when it comes to broadcasting, there's got to be a large enough audience, and there has to be a way of securing the financial. And meaning it's got to be underwritten, it's got to be sponsored, or unless, of course, I'm working through a syndicator or through stations that at least pay something. Now, I was in communication with someone just recently, and she was trying to help a friend of hers, bring his message to the airwaves and do, a particular, I guess, talk show. I don't know if it's going to be weekly, I don't know if it's going to be daily, and she was under the misconception that most of these networks charge. And I said, no. I said, there are so many vacant time slots on so many internet-based networks. And you see replay, rebroadcast, and recycled programs. And that's okay. But most of them cannot support a 24-hour network. Some of them can't even support a 12-hour network, because there are not enough quality hosts and shows, and even if you take the quality label out of it, there's not enough shows that can fill these slots, for those particular networks that are looking for a certain type of programs or in terms of genre, etc. So I just said that there's only a handful now that charge, and that's because they're greedy. And or besides trying to gouge the talk host, they want to make money on the front end and the back end. They want to make money off the host to pay for the time. And most of those networks, they have terrible sound. The ones that don't charge generally have better sound. And many times they have already the apparatus or they have the platform set up so that it can be automated or semi-automated. But if you're trying to enter the ranks of talk radio and you want to work your way through the internet's, I would highly recommend that you keep. I can give you a whole list, but there's so many of them that you'll see the welcome mat and the shingle is saying we're open and looking for talk show hosts. And so I continue to be barraged by people saying, please come back. I am not coming back and working through these various internet alternative fringe networks. I'm just not doing it. It takes a lot of time and effort. And so when you have that time and effort and resources and you are not able to monetize it adequately, and you at some point you just finally have to say, I've got to move on and do other things. But I'm still seeking opportunities, and I'm still very open to ideas that pertain to the ways that we can have a program that's supported and has a sufficient listening audience and continue to grow that. So that's where I'm at with that. But I'm just really pleased and very proud of Orion Talk Radio for their stand. And finally, a single solitary network that actually put it in writing and it said, we will not tolerate, under the guise of freedom of speech, hate speech, in particular Jewish hate speech. So glad you can be with us. And we're going to pick up on where we left off. And it's my way of shedding light on the haters, the defamers, the blamers. And I tried to do that to some degree when I was doing a daily, or I should say a weekday, live streamed program. And I took a lot of heat because people hid. They shielded themselves. They disguised their hatred. And they said, oh, this is just free speech. And we're just debating issues. And why shouldn't we be allowed to say what we want to say? And I've seen absentee landlords at certain stations and networks where they just say, hands off, I can't do anything about it. Well, if you had these people over at your home or in your office, and they started to trash your office, and they started to pilfer, and they started to pillage, and they started to be destructive, I think you do something about it. Likewise, if certain programs and certain hosts become destructive and they become detrimental, why wouldn't you do something about it? I really respect people that step up to the plate and they stand tall and stand strong, and they mean what they say and they say what they mean. But I see these people that pretend to be, I'm just exposing these folks and I'm just telling the truth. Well, you don't have a license to defame and to denigrate. Now, you can challenge and you can disagree and you can make points. But when you see a repetitive theme and you see redundancy, you realize that there is a deep-seated underlying hatred. There's an agenda, and it's a hate agenda. It's not about telling the truth. It's about the fact that you're able to utilize a streamed radio station or network on the internet and reach maybe a dozen people, maybe a few dozen, maybe even a couple hundred. And then maybe you'll have some additional downloads from your podcast. But to me, it's sick and it's sinister. And the most insidious is when people sell soft hate. And what I mean by soft hate are people that they'll act as though they're doing something noble. And they'll try to make it where they have some author on. Or they'll quote certain things, and they say, well, we're just debating issues. Well, who in the right mind is going to spend an inordinate amount of time going back to the Holocaust or going back to, now again, if you're someone of Jewish heritage and that is a subject that's very sensitive, and maybe from time to time you would. But if you're not of Jewish heritage, and there's so many things going on, and it's an accelerated pace that world events, current events, national, international, you name it, any given day, there are plenty of issues, and there are plenty of I would think objectives that you would have that you'd want to accomplish. But when you see a show and a host, or shows with an S and host with an S, and stations and networks that have this recurring, repetitive, redundant theme, and it's said and done at basically at the reduction, or I would say trumping other issues that are current and that are pressing, then you realize that the motivation is just pure, outright hate. And so hate speech, to me, I don't want to see people go to jail, but I'm glad that there are laws that pertain to defamation, and that pertain to slander and libel, and most countries have them. But no, I don't agree with Canada, and I don't agree with some European countries that if someone voices criticism or concern or have objections to certain issues that might pertain to a certain, and it happens to be that generally it pertains to the Jews and Holocaust and Zionism. I don't have a problem if someone has an intellectual argument that there's a specific topic or show that's addressed and they move on. But to continue to wage this war on the numbers of the Holocaust, or whether it happened, or whether there was gas or chambers, or it, to me, is just insane. Who has the time and the energy for this? I mean, really, how absurd. And so, again, I wanted to be very clear that if there is a prosecution, it should be individuals that have been offended, aggrieved parties, rather than the government getting in and censoring or controlling. But if you own, for instance, if you own a business, a station or a network, especially in the broadcast arena, you're under no obligation to say, oh, under the pretext and the pretense, if you will, the guise of free speech, I have to allow everybody and anybody on. Well, I noticed that most of these stations and networks, you rarely see anyone of color or ethnicity. And you rarely, if they really felt that strongly about these issues, they would try to recruit Zionists, neocons, and people that are specifically of a Jewish culture or heritage to confront and combat some of these things to make it very interesting radio. They don't do that. And so my concern here is this propagation and this perpetuation of this vile and vicious filth. And it's more and more people are buying into this. So now you have certain internet networks that haters are being attracted to. You know, it's sort of like certain things attract flies. You know, certain things that attract vermin. Well, that's what's happening now. Is that, and I'm just going to name them. You know, Rentz's network to some degree, but to a lesser degree, I think. Well, then again, you say David Duke, so okay, whatever. RBN has some very good shows, and they have some shows that they're just pure haters. You know, there's no question about that. And then you have Oracle that's become, I'd say, 75, maybe 80% is just pure anti-Semitism and just vile filth and hate. And then if they don't have that, with the exception of maybe Doug's news-oriented show, that blacklisted news, and there's a couple others, and I really don't pay that much attention to them, but the majority of them have become just hate factories. I mean, they just want to produce as much hate and filth and vile. But I was going to say that, then you've got like crumb bags and what's the Celtic or Celtic cellar dweller, I call them, which is just pure unadulterated pornography, in terms of the verbiage and in terms of anything that's communicated on that program. So again, they have the right to exist. But I also have the right to say, I don't want to be affiliated with that. And so certain stations and networks on the internet, I have separated myself. I have basically declared my independence. And some people thought I was crazy and just said, well, just stay in your own bubble. No, I don't stay in my own bubble. I don't have anybody tell me anything. Okay? So when I have people that say, well, you could just, put your fingers in your ears, essentially. You could just turn a blind eye. No, that's not me. That's never been me. And so I've always stood up for for those that are being bullied, those that are being abused, those that if I see cruelty, whether it's animal cruelty, cruelty as it pertains to humanity, and I see things that are unjust, unfair, that's what motivates me to do what I do. And so that's why I continue to discuss these issues. But again, this became a hot button issue because not only did Orion say, hey, Jim owns this network. He's the general manager of Orion Talk Radio. And it's his prerogative. It's his right to say, we're going to put in place some basic rules of decency and courtesy and respect and some semblance of sanity. Now, other networks can say they want to be Looney Tunes, they want to be crazy, they want to be just haters, and that's fine. But you don't have to condone, and you don't have to overlook the fact that these are hosts and shows and stations and networks that are perpetuators, and they are the enablers of this racism and hatred. And to me, it's just vicious and vile filth, and it's repugnant, it's repulsive, and needs to be repudiated. So that's what I have to say about that. Now, you could say, well, why don't you move on? Well, I don't really spend a lot of time on this, but when I saw that Orion Talk Radio did what I thought was a courageous act, and that they implemented a policy, and they made it very crystal clear. Now, it was an unwritten policy in the past, because when I first came over, I was affiliated with Orion and the Micro 1650, but when I made a switch where they became my flagship syndicator, where I could actually produce my program through their platform, I said, hey, I'm just coming from this island of abject filth and disgust and pure hatred, and I just want to make sure that by my departure from there, that kind of it's not replicated here. And Jim assured me that it was not. Gave me clear-cut examples of how he had eliminated programming, whether it be from RBN, Rents, or Oracle, based on the fact of if the programs were repetitive in theme as it pertained to hate speech. It's one thing that you have an idle caller, or an infrequent caller, or a guest, or a host says something. But again, I started out this broadcast explaining that if it's a recurring theme, it's redundant, it's repetitive, essentially thematic, that is the bread and butter, or the meat and potatoes of those broadcasts, well then that's when at some point you have to say, okay, I'm going to be an absentee landlord, and I'm just going to allow anything and everything goes. But if I don't have a network, but if I had a network, I'd be looking for those patriot programs that I feel a kinship with, that I feel aligned with. Why would I start a network by saying, well, I should just let anybody and everybody on? No, that's what you say. The internet should allow anybody and everybody to find wherever their home is, or to create their own station or network or their blog or their stream. I don't have a problem with that. I don't want the government to come in and interfere. But I also feel that if you have because many of these networks, or I would say the majority of them, the vast majority of them, are owned by certain individuals or a group of individuals, and so it is their business. And so, what is your business model? What's your business plan? What is the purpose or the mission of the station or the network? And I think that would go a long way to define that. I remember when I had problems, and I was trying to address those with Doug over at Oracle, and I said, well, this is your business. This is your station, your network. I said, oh, he said, well, the Celtic, I call him the Celtic cellar dweller. He said, oh, he has great numbers. He brings a lot of people on a Sunday night for us. Okay, so it's one night. It's 200 to 300 people. We don't even know if it could be the same people checking back in terms of the stats. So what? So you're willing to sell out for 200 or 300 people. These are degenerates, and most of them are just scumbags. I mean, really? I mean these kind of maggots and this kind of vile vermin. I don't get it. So if I were developing a stationer network, just like in your dating life, if you're still dating, if you're not committed to someone, or the friendships that you gather, or the businesses that you frequent or you associate with, anything that you do in life, you discern, you decide, and I hate to use the word, but it does fit here. You discriminate, not discriminate because of, well, I mean, you could, I guess, but it's because, you're going to find out what people do you align yourself with, who do you have a kinship with, who do you connect with, who do you have the best rapport with, and then with businesses, what are the businesses that provide those services or goods in ways, that have the price points and that have the quality and sometimes convenience and certainly, and there's a lot of other things I could say about business, but you get the point. So I really believe that if you are addressing this issue, you have to say, where does the host, many hosts are just reckless and irresponsible and just shoot their mouths off. But I really want to talk about the station manager or the program director or the owners. Do you bear any responsibility for those that you allow to take to the airwaves via your business, your station, your network, your stream? And when you're investing time and energy and resources, why aren't you qualifying? Why wouldn't you curate? Why wouldn't you try to get the best quality and the best fit? I don't understand why you wouldn't. But 2 or 3 of the programs that were evicted, rejected, and terminated from Orion Talk Radio, they are no losses. And there have been some others that left because of other internal skirmishes, and I was privy to some of that, and I was in agreement with Orion. Again, I'm on good terms. I think that they may have seen my departure as a bit abrupt and premature, but I tried to address those things, and I have to handle my own personal and professional affairs. But moreover, I realize that whether it's an Orion, whether it's other internet-based alternative networks, the numbers are not sufficient enough in a consistent mode to support programming financially. And also, for me, it's a numbers game. You want to reach more people. You want to expand. And you could say, well, why aren't you bringing more? Well, I was off the air for many years, and I don't have a cult following. And so, and if you just don't, I don't think people understand. The internet is so fragmented, so fractured, and that even someone like, and again, I'm not a fan of, but Tammy Bruce, if you look at her numbers, or Lycus's numbers, or some of the others that had, very big name recognition, if you will. I mean, they were known major market commodities. Their numbers are not that impressive, and they've not been able to sufficiently underwrite their programs through sponsorship or even through the subscriptions to podcasts, etc. So the model doesn't work unless you do it as a hobby, unless you do it in your spare time, or you're a retiree, or you just have the free time. And I understand the dedication. I understand your devotion. And, I tried every which way to make it work. And at this point, or this juncture, it did not work for me. But I appreciated the opportunity, and I'm going to continue independently producing programs in a multimedia way. And I hope that you'll join me in my efforts and visit our website, TomDonahueReports.com, and the blog and all the other things we offer, including YouTube channel, TomDonahueReports.com. Going to continue this series of hate speech versus free speech. Now, we have a network, a single solitary network that took a stand. They put together or I should say enacted a policy, and they have enforced the policy recently that those that traffic in hate speech, and we're talking about flagrant, blatant, obvious, repetitive, redundant, it's thematic. It's not just a single topic. It's not a single caller. It's not a debatable specific issue. It's this perennial theme, that this daily drumbeat of blaming, hating, and defaming Jews. Now, that should also go if people have these biases and these prejudices and bigoted approach to any race or ethnicity or creed, in my view. But I want to make something crystal clear. You have the right to be a bigot. You have the right to despise or hate. As a matter of fact, you have the right and the freedom to express that in your own home, in your own thought processes, in your own head. Quite frankly, if it's your own blog. And if it's a network or a station or a business or an outlet or a home other than your own that will allow you, that are compatible with that message, that condone that. So in my view, any station or network that allows this drumbeat of hatred, and if they allow for this theme that is redundant, repetitive, and just replete, well, then that means that they're condoning it. That means that on some level, they're not only compatible with this, but they're condoning it. And they're more or less cheering it on. But if I have my own station or network or store, you're going to stock it with the products, or you're going to create products, or you're going to provide services, or if you're a broadcast platform, you're going to discern and decide. Yes, you're going to discriminate, because we are allowed to decide who we date and who we marry and who we befriend, but we can't deny opportunities to others. So there's a difference when you say discerning or deciding or being discriminatory in the sense of what we decide. But we can't deny opportunities. Now, if you decide that you want to create your own stream, station, network, blog, by all means, say what you want to say. And if you find those houses of hate, and they want to allow for this, and they think it's cool, they think it's acceptable, and it's in their best interest to allow you an opportunity to broadcast this theme and this perspective and this viewpoint, well, then by all means. But there are certain stations or networks that are going to say, you're unwelcome. Now, just like in any job or any organization, there's bylaws, there's contracts, there's policies, and quite frankly, there's protocol. I mean, there's certain behaviors, there's certain actions that you can be disciplined, you can be demoted, you can be put on probation, or you could be simply let go, meaning fired, released of your duties. So there are repercussions, and there can be consequences to those choices. And the same goes for hate speech. But again, I am a person that says, by all means, you can think what you want to think, you can say what you want to say, you can believe what you want to believe, but just like the Founding Fathers really believed that if you cross the line, and if you encroach or intrude on the rights of others, and quite frankly, there are libel laws, there's slander laws, And so if you want to traffic in defamation, you may feel some legal heat. But no, I don't think the government should in any way jail somebody, imprison somebody for what they think or what they say or what they believe. Absolutely not. There has to be an injured party. There has to be a corpus electi. But in terms of civilly, and certainly in terms of shaming someone, I don't have a problem with that. But these people that hide and disguise the hatred, some of they soft pedal it, or they don't take responsibility, or they place the onus of responsibility on. Well, I know many of these alternative and fringe networks and stations that on a daily basis they get requests for people that have a program idea, or they suggest a guest, or they actually want to become a host or have been host, and they're turned away because maybe they don't fit a certain mode or mold, and it's not the right fit for their station or network. So no station or network, whether it be the alternative, whether it be the mainstream, is under any obligation. Otherwise, that would be the fairness doctrine, where you're saying, hey, you got to let all voices be heard, and that especially opposing voices. So I think any broadcast platform, it will behoove them, and it's in their best interest to decide what programming meshes with what their mission statement is. What is it that they're trying to accomplish? Like, there are some stations that they just broadcast conservative political talk. There's others that mix it up with variety. Some of them want conservative, liberal, independent, libertarian. They want it all. Some people want just hardcore conspiracy. And some want, things that are not so conspiratorial or so controversial. That's why there's lots of stations, lots of networks. But I personally decided that I didn't want to affiliate myself with that. And people would say, well, you can compartmentalize. You can separate yourself from that. You can put a veil on, or you can put the iron curtain. You can shut it down and just say, hey, these are my 2 hours, and live and let live. Initially, I tried to say, well, because I don't really listen to those programs, I'm not really concerned about them. But then, when I started to listen, and Oracle would be a classic example, and I realized there was pornographic and abject scum and filth in some of the programming, in the weekly programming. And then some of the daily programming, there was this kind of mission creep of blame and hate the Jews. And using terms like Jew pig, and that, in all Jews, there's not any, it'd be like saying that all Muslims should be feared, and all of them are enemies of our republic. No. But, I find it interesting that those that tend to be the Jew haters, on the one hand, they say, oh, they're from the 13th tribe, and they're not real Jews, which I use the term Israelites. Oh, it is true that some of them may not be part of the original 12 tribes, not even Judah or Benjamin, and may be something that was considered by Arthur Kessler as the 13th tribe, that other than those 12 tribes. But if you're saying they're not Jews, but then you continue attacking Jews, who decides whether someone is a Jew or not? Or even for that matter, I believe I'm an Israelite, and I was part of the 10 lost tribes, but that's just my view. I'm not here to be, impressing upon anybody. My concern is that I have a personal relationship with Christ, and that the Old and New Testament, in many ways, are something that are near and dear to me, and ring true, and hold a special place for me. But I noticed that they don't attack the Muslim jihadist, the Islamo-fascism, and they generally they just attack Christians, or what they like to call Christian Zionists. And again, I'm not someone that is a big defender and a believer in the state of Israel or in Zionism. And I believe that the Israelites are greater in number and spread throughout the world, as the Bible says, and it encompasses more than a narrow definition. But that doesn't mean that I have any animosity or hate towards any group. And I've always judged people by, the individual, and not by the specific sect or tribe or nation state, because I don't believe that all of any group is good or bad. And I don't judge groups, I judge individuals, but I also can judge ideologies. Now, it's fair to say that if you take issue with certain things in the Talmud, or the Kabbalah, or any book of any religious order, that's your prerogative. And I take issue with some things, even in the Christian Bible, or the Judeo-Christian Bible, if you're talking about the Old and the New Testament. Because I have found, and I'm not here to proselytize, but there seemingly some contradictions. But again, I look for the overall, the overarching points that are made. I'm not as concerned about looking for defects or flaws. But I want to get back to this point of the fact that those that hate the Jews and are using this, internet streaming radio for new platforms and venues to spread this hate, the gospel of hate. Well, what I found is that most of them don't have any religious affiliations or spiritual underpinnings. And so essentially they're little gods running around. And I'm more distrustful of someone that doesn't have any spiritual or religious identity or affiliation or connection, because they're only beholden to themselves, and the only higher order is themselves, and so they're going to do what's in their own best self-interest. But not all, but many that are spiritual and religious, and their beliefs that there's something greater than themselves, and maybe they'll be held accountable in an afterlife, or they're trying to achieve some level of recognition as they approach that time of moving on from the physical plane here on planet Earth. But I find that many of these folks, there is no spirit, there is no religion. It's just their own thoughts, just their own viewpoints. And so I'm very distrustful and actually disdainful of those that are at their own little islands and really believe that they're their own little gods. And I think that if you really are connected to a creator, you're going to come from I would say a space of of love and of understanding, and trying to at least bring that to the table in your daily interactions. It's okay to get angry. Christ got angry when he turned over the tables in the temple and threw out the money changers. It's okay to have a wide range of emotions, but as people of faith and a connection with the Creator, and believing that they're not the be all end all. Generally, they strive to be a better person and to make positive contributions in life and look forward to an afterlife. But I hear all this hatred towards any persons of faith, unless they're people that oppose Israel and the Jews, then it's hands off. And I don't understand why they feel that freedom of speech is the freedom to spew and spout hatred and why it's so important to attack just one, single out a specific group, but then they're confused as to whether they're Jews or not Jews. And then they'll talk about HARP and they'll talk about all these things, but then when they realize that if it's directed by the Jews, why would they allow for Hurricane Sandy to decimate and devastate, New York City, northern New Jersey, Long Island? Some of these arguments, they just don't hold up. But no, I don't favor censorship. But I do believe that if you want to bring your bad habits or your bad language or you want to spout hate, and that's not conducive and it's not going to be condoned by a separate business entity or broadcast platform, they have the right to refuse your services, your programming. And I'm just glad that finally there is a single network that I was affiliated with that decided that we're going to enact policies. Because it doesn't, we're getting nowhere talking to these hosts and trying to talk common sense and common decency. And so if they can't do this by just being, nudged to do the right thing, well then, we'll put them on notice. And they did. But of course they always have to lie. They're always going to say, oh, we quit. No, you didn't quit. You were fired. And the musical chairs from other networks, many times you've been either demoted or you've been removed. And then you just keep looking for other portals or pockets of hatred to take your message. And this is what I wrote as a description for the last two broadcasts, and I think you might find these interesting. And we do make these all these broadcasts if you're listening on the stream or the 24/7 channel through Podomatic, and you can just go to my website TomDonahueReports.com. But this is how I defined it: exposing HateGate, the villainous vipers of vile, fringe alternative streaming radio at its worst. Blamers and defamers, purveyors of hate, with the sole goal of trafficking in hate. They suffer from a seething, addictive fixation to hatred, targeting all Jews for the world's ails. Confusing hate speech with free speech. Orion Talk Radio has stepped up and banned this flagrant brand of hate speech, recently implementing and enforcing their zero tolerance policy. Let me name you another outlet that has been doing this, and didn't have to write about it, but at one point it became a persistent, festering boil on the site, and that's TalkStream Live. Bill Fries and TalkStream Live decided that if someone, and any host, now they're not going to penalize the entire network or station, but individual shows and hosts that decide that they want to be part of the hate game and HateGate, and they want to do this on a frequent and persistent basis, well, those shows have been removed. And there's many of them that you no longer see their picture, you no longer see their titled show or their stream. So I want to thank Bill Fries and TalkStream Live for standing up and doing the right thing. And he's been taking some heat for this. But again, the subjects can be controversial. The subjects can be areas that, and I know there's a lot of programs that he doesn't appreciate, and there's many that he does, but he decided to do the right thing and end this pervasive, persisting hate that was being propagated and perpetrated. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Go to TomDonahueReports.com. And welcome, America and beyond. I'm Tom Donahue for Tom Donahue Reports. Patriotism in action. So glad you can be with us. I want to just make a few final points as it pertains to the series that I just completed and at least some of you probably heard, on exposing hate speech, the hall of haters, the hall of shamers, the vipers that spew their vile. Now, there is a difference between free speech in an open society and responsible speech that involves, being reliable and accurate, truthful, credible. And in all companies and in most households, there's standards. And that there are rules of engagement. And there are certain policies. And there's common sense, and there's rules of decency and dignity. I would hope. And so the point here is that you have a right to think it, you have the right to believe it, you have the right to say it. But you can't force or impose your will on private industry, privately held broadcast companies and streaming internet companies and portals and platforms, and just say that if you don't let me say this, it's censorship and it's unfair and it's unjust. And no, now if you feel that it's unjust or that you have been dealt a bad hand, well, do you have a contract? And the reason I applaud so adamantly Orion Talk Radio is because even though it was an unwritten policy, and it really was, I think most responsible companies would say, do I really have to put that in writing that, we're not going to condone hate or speech or racist or bigotry or, why would any company, I guess you almost have to put it in writing for some that, we're just not, this is not an environment that's conducive if you're a bigot, a racist, a hater, a defamer. It's just common sense. And so when you're talking about censorship, that means that you have the government coming in and controlling and with the force of government and with its laws. At least I'm not suggesting that if someone decides to say things that are racist, regardless, or it's just, obvious hate speech, I think that unless someone has been damaged or defamed, injured in some way, then they can take it through civil litigation. But there's no industry that should feel as though that, in all due fairness, your program should be able to stay on the air. Now, the problem is that we have so many serpents and swine with no spines that run these internet networks. And they're trying to fill up time, and some of these hosts have cult followings, and it doesn't matter how degenerate they are, it doesn't matter, how debased they are. If they can bring numbers, and if they can even bring advertisers, you're more than welcome. Now, the networks I have the most respect for, or stations, is that there's a mission. And yes, there is an agenda. Now, unless you brand your station that you're open-minded and open to all points of view, and you welcome shows and hosts, but as you've noticed, the most popular talk radio, or actually radio in general, is the conservative political talk genre. Now, I disagree with some of these corporate shills that claim to be conservative, where I take issue with their brand of conservatism. But in terms of a successful business model, in terms of a bankable commodity, there is no question. It's the number one radio format. Now, with that said, let's look at some of the branding of these stations, whether it's Salem, whether, they have certain monikers, they have certain marquee names they use, like the Patriot, or they have intelligent talk, or conservative this or that. And so they look for programs and shows that meet those specific goals and objectives and audience expectations, and that's their station. They have the right to do that. Now, if you have the money to buy a station in the terrestrial world, or you want to create more inexpensively an internet stream or station, then you can decide what your agenda is, your format, or is it just wide open? It can be liberals, it can be conservatives, independents, anarchists, communists, socialists, corporatists, whatever. But why do certain hosts believe that they have the right to walk in and trash with their mouths a station's format or the program schedule? What entitled them to that? Did they earn it? No. And many of them, they approach these networks, unless they already know that they're fellow haters, and they'll say, oh, these are the subjects or the topics that I cover. And then little by little, it's kind of like mission creep. All of a sudden the camel's nose is under the tent, and then you just know you have a full-blown hater. Now, many of them, praise Hitler and, believe that Nazism and, anything that they can disparage or demean or defame Jews is a great thing and put all the blame on them. And, you don't think that there would be world controllers and people that would step up to the plate, whether it's Hollywood, banking, if there were less Jews or no Jews in the world? I mean, that's just ridiculous. Yes, they hold high positions of power, but then again, look at medicine, look in the arts, or other trades or industries, and the inventions. I mean, there's lots of things that this group of people as a whole have contributed mightily to society, and so it's just sad that they focus in on the bad apples, and because every race, creed, color, ethnicity, tribe, sect all have bad actors, and that's just part of life. But I don't understand how people they'll criticize, even the alternative media, for instance. Now, people that are actually part of the alternative media, so they claim to be, but then they say, oh, all the alternative media is tarnished. And they're all shills, they're all sellouts, they're all suck-ups, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, so what are you part of? So they're not part of the alternative media, so they're part of something else, whatever that is, I don't know. And then they say, you can't follow any Abrahamic religions, no Judeo-Christian religions, no Christian religion, no Jewish religion, and then anything that has to do with Christ, or has anything to do with Abraham, or has anything to do with Yahweh or Jehovah. And then you say, okay, well, what do you believe? What is it that motivates you besides hate? What's your frame of reference? What's your moral compass? What's your ethical guide? And there is none. So I just wanted to just do a final wrap on this. And again, the primary reason I went after this was because I was so glad to see, the underbelly of maggots be cast aside. That they'll claim that, oh, we quit because we weren't going to be censored. Well, no. They've either been demoted, replaced, which really means fired, and they're seeking new ports of refuge. That's just the way it is, a safe harbor for hate. But I decided that with Orion taking heat for their principled stand, TalkStream Live also taking heat because they have given eviction notices and closed shop on a lot of hosts that are haters. And again, TalkStream Live, just like Orion, it's not just because of one subject or one caller or one guest. It's because it's a chronic condition. It's a psychosis. And these are psychotic individuals that need psychiatric treatment, because they they are so. I'm trying to think of the right word I want to use here, and it needs to be precise, because this with their condition, it needs, mental and physical attention. I think that and spiritual. So they're just a piece of work, and they're a project for clinical research. But we'll just leave it at that.